Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, this entire month, we are focusing our topics of simplifying all on the concept of reemergence. And reemergence, the way I best like to think about this is I don't know about you, but the last couple of years certainly have felt like being a bit in a cocoon, like our life have been transforming around us, and we're this little caterpillar that's slowly starting to emerge and transform into something bigger and better and more beautiful. And so, if I was going to take that as a theme, today's topic is slightly different, but so relevant as we think about how we as humans move along our lives and the things we buy, bring into our home, ingest into our bodies, and wear on our bodies as well. Can we do that better? How to buy better and consume less. That's the topic we are tackling today. And my special guest is the perfect person to help us simplify it. Her name is Sian Conway-Wood, and she's an ethical marketing and communication strategist based in the UK. She's also the founder of Ethical Hour and the author of the book, Buy Better, Consume Less. She works with ambitious, cause-driven startups, charities, NGOs, CEOs, political parties, and lobby groups to help create change through the power of communications. She first started her journey into a more sustainable living online in 2016, and in 2018, she was named the UK's Green and Eco Influencer of the Year. Also the Eco Influencer of the Year again in 2020. So I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Sian Conway-Wood. Hey, Sian.
Hey, Mary. Thank you so much for having me. I am such a fangirl of the podcast, as you know. So I'm so glad to be here doing this with you.
Oh, it's so great to have you here as well. And, sometimes I think it's nice to hear what you've been up to in the world because you have been doing big things in the last few years. Big.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had a time of it, haven't we? But there's been a lot going on, and I just think it's such an exciting time to be in sustainability in particular. And the clients that I work with are all kind of in that space. And there's just been such a wave of general awareness about the impact that we're having on the planet and a desire to do something. And so it's a really positive time, although obviously there's some doom and gloom and we won't talk about that because I always say you have to be an optimist if you're going to work anywhere around climate communications, anything to do with the climate emergency. You have to be optimistic.
For sure.
But there really is that desire to do something, and that's really where this journey for me came from.
Yeah. And I think that the last couple of years being in a pandemic, no matter where you were in the world, and I spent a bit of the pandemic in England and a bit of it in the States, I think a lot of us, it forced us to slow down and actually consider how we're living our lives, how we are budgeting our households, how we want to reemerge out into the world as things start to open up again. It's been a forced pause for us globally, and I don't know if there's really been that in our generation previously.
I don't think there has, and I don't think we're through that yet. And in terms of kind of eco behavior in particular, we saw people really take that pause, really change their behavior, and then kind of snap back quite quickly. So we saw things like a massive reduction in air pollution and carbon emissions, and then they instantly snapped back. Right. And I think actually it's going to take time for us all to really process what we've been through, what we're still going through now, as this kind of evolves and like you said, as we emerge. I love that theme because I just think it's a real opportunity for us to re-examine what we want and the way in which we live our lives. And I think it's such an important moment for that. And we all really need to give ourselves the grace around that. And that's, I think, where there's a lot of pressure coming in to just get back to normal. And actually, we just need to stop, because do we really want to go back to normal, or do we want something better?
Yes. And Sian, I feel like this is where we as consumers stumble, because we look at the problem of climate change. In the month of February alone, where I am here in Texas, we had 3 massive winter storms blow through in 1 month. And, one day it's 27 degrees outside and literally the next day it's 74 degrees. So you can't deny climate change is real. Global warming, or as you say, global heating is real. You can't deny it anymore. And I think that we as an individual consumer go, yeah, but what can I do? Like, what could I literally do? What impact am I actually making, little old me? What do you have to say to that?
I think there's a couple of problems here. I think we are overwhelmed by the scale of the problem because it is enormous. And it's very easy to fall into that trap of I'm too small to make a difference. And that was one of the barriers that I identified in the book as kind of reasons we don't take more action. But I think there's another side to this, that actually individual action has been continuously pushed as the narrative. And we've been told constantly that we have to address our carbon footprints, we have to change the way we buy, but actually the system around us isn't changing. And interestingly, the concept of your individual carbon footprint, so how much emissions you are personally responsible for, was actually a PR campaign run by British Petroleum, one of the biggest big oil companies who are fundamentally responsible for the climate emergency. So they ran this PR campaign. It is a very handy tool, and it's a good way of thinking about your own personal impact. And it's a good place to start if you want to run that calculation and then look for small changes you can make. But I think we still need to see it in the perspective that actually 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. So it's not that we don't make a difference, but it's that we are told that the responsibility is completely on our shoulders, and that gets very overwhelming very quickly. And actually, when we focus just on individual action and just on, buying your bamboo toothbrush and reducing your plastic waste, the pace of change is too slow for the pace of this emergency that's going on around us.
Yeah. And so that's what I really, really loved about reading this book was, because I'll be honest, I came into it going, yeah, but what could I do? I'm doing what I can. Like, is it making any difference? To realizing really what the greater problem at play is, and something that you call greenwashing, which I really want to talk about in just a bit. But I think that it's interesting as a human in a first world country, the world is so eager to sell us magic pills and quick solutions and same day delivery to all of our quote unquote, air quotes, problems, right? Like, why should we even consider buying better and consuming less right now? What's your take on that?
So this entire book was actually born out of frustration that all around me I was seeing friends and family and colleagues in the eco space doing absolutely everything they possibly could and really making big sacrifices in many ways to be more eco-friendly, and then getting really burnt out and feeling shamed that they weren't doing enough, that things weren't changing. And then the anxiety would creep in. So eco-anxiety is actually recognized by psychologists now, having that fear about what is happening to our environment around us.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to then just be the ostrich who puts their head in the sand and goes, right, I'm doing everything I can. None of it's working. I'm too small to make a difference. And actually, the idea of buying better, consuming less was really born from the idea that this is not a problem we can shop our way out of, but that is the message we are receiving all the time. When you talk about the climate emergency and what can we do about it, you're told eat less meat. So that's a purchasing decision to begin with. Fly less, so purchase different transport. Change the way you buy your clothes, change the stores that you buy from, buy local. It's all great and good and brilliant to do, but it's not accessible for everybody, and it's not the only solution. And one of the analogies I talk about in the book that I think illustrates this absolutely perfectly is the idea of eggs in the supermarket. So when you go to the supermarket, you've got two shelves, and high up you've got your free range happy hen eggs. Hens have had a lovely happy life, that's all good. You'll pay a little bit more for those ones. And then on the shelf underneath you've got the eggs from the caged hens that haven't had a great life. And obviously that's an ethical thing, but there are environmental concerns at play there as well. But regardless of which you choose, and you might not have a choice, you might be on a low income and only be able to afford the caged eggs, even if you want the free range ones. But regardless of what decision you make at that point, the supermarket still makes a profit.
Yes.
So they are not actually that invested in you choosing the free range eggs, because the profit margin will be similar on both. But why are the unethical eggs there? Why is that even an option for us? And actually, instead of us standing there and going, which eggs should I choose? And can I afford to spend that little bit more on those ethical eggs? If we just shift our attention and start asking the question, why are you selling the unethical eggs? Why are you making the unethical eggs? Then change starts to happen at the pace and the scale it needs to happen.
Yes.
However, we're all so short on time. And that's where it becomes really, really hard to do the buy better bit, because researching every single thing you buy and the supply chain it sits within and the companies that own the companies that own the companies you're buying from very quickly becomes impossible when you think about the amount of purchasing decisions we make in a day and the amount of brands we use in a day. And we just don't have time to do that. And again, that's individual action. We are having to go and do that research and know what we're looking for and educate ourselves. But if you take the buy better and you do that where you can, but you also put it hand in hand with consuming less, stepping off of that hamster wheel of mass consumption and being made to think that you need to buy more and more stuff all the time to be happy and healthy and successful, what you actually do is you buy yourself back time. Yes. And you can then use that time to question the supermarket on why they're selling both eggs, as an example. So the book really looks at both angles. It looks at how do we get out of that consumption rat race? How do we live better lives for ourselves? And then how do we use that little bit of time that we've got back, not as consumers, but actually as citizens on this planet, to push back and say, this is the world we want to live in, and this is how we want it to be. And the corporations and the politicians and everybody else that actually has the power to change that system, they work for us. So let's push back and make them work for us in the way that we want.
1,000% yes. And that's where you empower yourself as one individual, is by joining the critical mass and saying, we want better. And that's where I really want to dive into the practical ways of how to make positive change in the world. But I want to first start by laying down the foundation, because I think, to your point, when you don't know what you don't know to question what it is. You just look at the price point and go, yeah, I'll go for the cheap one or the affordable one because I'm working on a budget here. But as Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. So let's start by talking about the foundations here. So what do you mean by the term greenwashing, and how can we spot it when we go shopping?
So this is a really interesting one, Mary, because if you go into any supermarket, big box store, high street fashion retailer right now, you would probably tell me that 80-90% of what you see on the shelves there is sustainable, eco-friendly, ethical, all these lovely green buzzwords. And you're probably going to see lots of natural brown packaging and lots of leaf logos. And actually, when you dig in, a lot of those big corporations are spending more money to make themselves look ethical and sustainable than they are spending in their supply chains to make those changes and to actually be better for the planet and the people that are involved in making the stuff that we consume. And that's what greenwashing is. So it's fundamentally misleading marketing, but specifically around the sustainability. The good news is that advertising standards agencies around the world are starting to enforce legislation to stop this happening, because it is illegal. It's against trading standards.
Yes.
But again, the pace of that change is quite slow. And the fundamental problem is that the idea of sustainability is very subjective. That as a concept covers your carbon footprint, your methane emissions, your water footprint, your plastic, your waste. I could go on and on and on for hours. But companies use it in a very specific way to mean certain things that fundamentally, as consumers, we don't always understand. It's very confusing if you don't have, the scientific background and the time to sit and research all of this stuff, which, let's face it, most of us don't.
Yeah. Well, and this is what's funny. So I want to read from your book, because this was something that I didn't understand until you actually said it and spelled it out for me. So you say this on page 31. As consumers, we have become more concerned about plastic footprint in recent years. Biodegradable and compostable alternatives have become increasingly popular. But these are unregulated terms, and much like the confusing conscious fashion collection, many consumers don't actually know what they mean. They just assume that they're good for the planet. Although these labels often appear on packaging together, the two aren't interchangeable. Biodegradable means that the material is capable of being decomposed, so it will break down and return to nature. Compostable materials are made of organic matter and also break down, but they go one step further and actually make nutrient-rich compost as they decay. However, because the terms are unregulated, biodegradable products and packaging don't have to declare how long they take to break down or what conditions they need to do so. I mean, like just that little drop of wisdom for me went, holy cow. Like I'm buying this thing feeling good internally, like, oh, I'm buying a biodegradable thing. But if the thing takes 400 years to break down, then in essence, as you say in the book, even plastic is biodegradable. Like if it takes 1,000,000 years to break down. Like how as consumers do we like spot the nonsense in packaging and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. And on the plastics, it doesn't ever go away. It just breaks down into microplastics, which we know are coming back into our food chain and stuff. So this is how it so quickly becomes overwhelming, because even I feel overwhelmed talking about this and thinking, oh my goodness, you know, how do we make the right decision? There's a really handy framework for getting started with this and avoiding getting overwhelmed, which are the 7 sins of greenwashing, which chapter 1 of the book is all about. These were actually invented by an environmental marketing agency called TerraChoice, who were then bought out by UL. But they essentially map out some of the ways that some of the most common ways that companies greenwash. And it's a really handy framework to kind of get familiar with if you do want to make better choices when you get to the supermarket, but without having to get your phone out at every single opportunity and start Googling, you know, where these products come from and how they're going to break down and all of those kind of things. So within there, we've got things like the really obvious outright lies. And you would like to think that companies don't do that, but there are case studies, unfortunately, where that has happened. One of the most famous ones being the emissions scandal, where VW were fixing the data on the emissions of the cars they were selling. Yeah, just shocking. You've got things like worshipping false labels. So we're seeing this a lot at the moment. Obviously, there are certain credentials like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, Crueltyfree, that although they're not perfect, they're third-party accredited. So for a company to say that their chocolate or their tea or their cotton is fair trade, they have to meet certain standards and pay a licensing fee to have that badge on their products. So it gives us that little bit extra trust as consumers. But what is happening as brands are cutting costs is that some of the really big brands are moving away from those and are saying, we're going to do this in-house. So we're still going to meet all of the standards, but we're going to regulate it ourselves and we're going to have our own fair trade label. So now there's 3 or 4 different fair trade standards out there. And effectively, those brands are marking their own homework. We can't tell whether they are actually holding up those standards or not. So this kind of upholding of false labels, and cruelty-free is another one with so many loopholes and complexities that it can become really, really challenging to actually know what you're looking at when you read packaging. So looking for those third-party accreditations that are genuine is a really good way of just quickly making a decision that's better in the process.
And to your point on cruelty-free really quick, which I thought, I didn't know this before reading your book, is that makeup manufacturers and things, brands that are putting, you know, say foundation and powder and things like that out there, they may list cruelty-free on the packaging, but if their ingredients are sourced from, you know, places where like animal testing is required, like in China, then the ingredients before it becomes manufactured and becomes the final product, it's like, wow. Like, again, it goes back to your point of supply chain, looking at the supply chain and where the loopholes are when these brands put these labels on there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many loopholes with that. And it's the same with so many of these different areas of being ethical and sustainable. And really where I got to in in my journey of trying to buy better was, why am I responsible for this? Why am I having to read an ingredients list and know where that came from and whether it's been tested on animals? And I'm having to dig into the fine print on websites. And even when I'm doing that, I'm coming across lies and misleading statements and cover-ups and all of these different sins of greenwashing. So I got to the point of having those kind of memorized, and I would be able to spot them on shelves, and I would make reasonable decisions, but things would still fall through my net. But actually, if there was legislation in place that meant it was actually illegal to test on animals, for example, just to continue with the cruelty-free analogy, I wouldn't need to do any of that. That wouldn't occupy any of my brain space when I was shopping, because I would just know that all of the cosmetics I'm buying are not tested on animals, because it's completely unnecessary and it's not actually the best way to make a safe product in this day and age. So why isn't the legislation there? And obviously legislation takes time and it's very complex, but actually as consumers and as citizens, if we start pushing for that, we can create change. And I think, to come back to what we were talking about at the beginning, one thing that the pandemic taught us was how quickly things can change, how quickly new legislation can come in, new guidance, and fundamentally behavior change, because that's what we're talking about here, is mass behavior change and mass moving in a different direction to the one we've been going in. And I think if we can hold on to one thing from the pandemic as maybe a slight silver lining, it's that change is possible.
Yes.
And then if we can start, as we do this reemergence that you so beautifully described, if we can start to do that by saying, actually, I do want a better world. I do want the products that I buy to be more ethical and more sustainable. But the weight of that is not solely on my shoulders to go out there and make better purchasing decisions, because that is fundamentally impossible to do for everything I'm buying. So I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm going to let go of any sustainability shame that I'm feeling when I'm not buying the most ethical and sustainable product. And I'm going to channel that energy and that time into boycotting, into putting pressure on companies, using my social media, writing to my political representatives, and doing those things that actually en masse create change much quicker.
Yes. And I mean, I think about like my parents in, when I was younger in the 80s and early 90s, they would write letters to brands and ask questions and things like that. And they may get some standard stock letter in the mail 3 to 6 weeks later. But in this day and age, it just takes a tweet out, tagging a brand, asking those questions. And in the book, you mention it, and it's so smart and it's so true. They have PR companies and communications departments that is their sole job, is to answer and respond to the public when questions pop up. And so I love that as a suggestion of, like, if you are questioning the supply chain of your favorite makeup brand, or is this in fact cruelty-free or not, ask on your social media channels, tag the brand, tag fair trade, and let these people do the work and the research to respond back, right?
Exactly. They are paid for their time to do that, and you are not. But it's very quick to send a tweet, and then it's very public, and they are then accountable to answering you. And actually, let's be slightly fair to the corporations. So I work in marketing and communications, and I support brands that are genuinely trying not to greenwash and trying to embed this stuff and do better. Yeah. And one of the subheadings somewhere in the book there is actually, "Are corporations evil?" Because I think sometimes there's this perception that they're really terrible and they're only out to make profit. Obviously, there are some corporations like that, but I'm fundamentally of the belief that actually business as a whole has the creativity and the resources to solve a lot of these problems. But the businesses I've worked with extensively in this space trying to create change are overwhelmed, because just as we are as consumers, there are so many different areas of their supply chain, their operation, that needs to change.
Yes.
They don't really know where to start. So if you try and sit down and prioritize your values and say, right, do I want to just buy cruelty-free makeup, or do I want to buy plastic-free? Because it's very hard to do both.
Yeah.
That is a really difficult moral decision to make. And you don't like making that decision because you're saying one thing's more important than another when it's not. And the businesses are facing that at a global scale. So what do we change first? And we have to think about the impact that has on everybody in our supply chain and everything else. And we have to do it in a way that is sustainable for our business financially and for the planet and for our staff and everything else. So they are looking to their consumers because obviously if the consumers come with them, they know the profit's still going to be there. So they need to be guided by us saying, look, it's really, really important to us that the chocolate we buy from your confectionery brand is fair trade, that it's palm oil free, that it comes in paper. And these are our priorities. Yes. So the more we do that questioning, the more we do that pushback, the more guidance we actually give them on what we want to change as consumers. And then they can go away and put that into a plan and start implementing those changes.
Right. And just like the thinking about a cruise ship having to make a hard left turn, it's never going to be possible. It has to be slow and steady and deliberate, right? And so these brands are big cruise ships in essence that, you know, if they get enough pushback from their consumers, whether it is via social media or, you know, bringing forth a petition or speaking to your local representatives, even at the city council level, you can make huge change. Because think about at the city council level, that's school boards, you know, how and what foods are getting served to your kids in your schools. And those changes ripple out over time, right?
Exactly. There was what I tried to do with the book was really bring in a lot of positive examples of where this has worked, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed and feel like it's not going to make a difference. Be like, well, if my bamboo toothbrush isn't making a difference, how is my tweet going to make a difference? Right. And get trapped in that. So I really wanted to infuse it with practical steps we can take and case studies of where these steps have worked. And there was a fantastic one from Bristol in England where they had decided as a community that they did not want toxic pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides used in the gardens and in the public green areas. And so they lobbied the council and they got a local ban. So that was a huge global company that has had, you know, hundreds of thousands of lawsuits brought against them and all sorts over the years and has a terrible track record. But you look at them and you think they are so fundamental to our agriculture industry. They are so embedded in lobbying government, you know, in the US and in the UK. And they are at such a high level that how can a small community make a change? But actually just they got together as local groups and said, we are just not going to use it. And we are going to be completely free in this one area of this one town of that one company. And actually that's made a change to their daily lives. So we don't always have to be thinking this is a huge global emergency and I need to do something at a global level. I've always loved the phrase think global but act local. And I think if we all take that approach to what can I do in my local area with the people around me to make a change, that is the way that we're going to fix this.
Yes. And I can imagine, just with that one example, I imagine healthcare requests and people going into NHS clinics had dropped. And if people are healthy, then theoretically, I can just see my little hamster in my brain is spinning of like, if it's a healthier city, then people will want to move to that city. That increases real estate and the economy there. It increases culture. It increases all the things. There's so many positive outputs from just one change, one thing that ripples out over time. And, you know, back to the cruise ship analogy, a lot of these brands that have 5, 10, 15-year plans. So, you know, things that may not be immediate changes in year one can be incorporated into their larger plan so that they can move towards it. I want to actually mention one example that I was not aware of that you brought up in the book on page 41. In 2018, luxury British fashion retailer Burberry sparked an outcry on social media when an earnings report revealed that the brand had destroyed over $28 million of unsold clothes and accessories in 1 year. They ended up burning it because they felt that if they released that product out into the world, it would either devalue the product or the brand. And, you know, luxury fashion, as you say, commands high price points. because the brand behind it and the carefully crafted aspirational image that goes with it. It has to have that sense of exclusivity, right? And I think about that, and that breaks my heart to think $28 million worth of unsold clothes and accessories got burned rather than taking it to, countries and places where this is a real issue and a real need. But to your point in the book, people spoke up about it and they did something. Tell us about that story.
So that is actually shockingly really common practice in the luxury fashion space. And actually, if you come down a few levels to fast fashion, it's even relatively common practice there. So if you buy online, as many people do, you don't necessarily know that garment's going to fit you. So it's relatively cheap. Perhaps you buy it in 3 different sizes just to check, or you buy 3 different dresses and you pick the one that you want and you send some back. Actually, the stuff we're returning doesn't go back into circulation because it's so expensive for the retailers to put that back into a warehouse, to quality check it, repack it and recirculate it, that actually it just gets wasted. And then we've also got the problem that we're consuming so much fashion all the time that we are then donating to charity shops and, we're trying to pass that on because we don't want it to go to landfill, but they are overwhelmed. And we're now starting to see that actually it's just being shipped abroad to countries in Africa and places like that. And actually it's a problem for them then because they don't have the infrastructure to recycle and repurpose it and things. So we're just in this situation where we've got too much stuff, but we're also not changing our attitudes. So the burning of the luxury thing was all about brand and was all about preserving that. We want to stay at this aspirational level where people really aspire to buying expensive fashion. So we don't want to see our stuff in a discount store. So we're just going to destroy it and keep it that exclusive rather than address the amount that they were producing. But there was this massive backlash when that came out and was kind of revealed from that earnings report. And then there were some interesting collaborations and things starting to emerge from that and some solutions. And I think what was interesting there was people started to question, why is that so aspirational? And why are we pursuing that? So Burberry themselves obviously then made a pledge that they were going to stop this practice, and a lot of other brands started to come under pressure for that and start to think about their levels of production and how they manage their waste. But at a consumer level, we're starting to rethink luxury, and actually from a luxury fashion perspective, the way that trend is going, it's now a lot more about where it's made and who made it and the quality of the materials. And it's less about the label and the name of the fashion house and things like that. So I think our aspirations are starting to change. And sometimes when these big scandals come out, although they're really shocking, it's that shock factor we need to take that pause and go, hang on a minute, why are we all aspiring to wear that label when actually that label, it turns out, doesn't align with my values, because I'm not okay with these products being burnt just so that they wouldn't be sold at a discount or given to someone who needs them. That's not the world that I want to live in. That's not the products I want to wear. And when I put a brand on my body, I am a walking advert for that brand.
Yes. And again, when you know better, you do better, right? So I think that is true. Like when you understand what's at the play here. And I think that's it. I think and I'll put my hand up first, like before knowing that these things were happening, the marketing machine behind merchandising is one thing, but then the actual overproduction of materials, the destroying of materials, and what that effect has on our climate and our world as a whole, then you start to go, well, hang on, well, what are my core values on shopping? What are my core values on what I consume, like physically put into my body or keep in my household? So can you give me a couple of ideas of how to begin to assess your shopping habits and actually start to make those simple positive changes to buy better? Are there a few questions I should ask myself before buying stuff?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to just take that pause and recognize that this massive billion-dollar industry that is advertising and marketing and communications has over the years absolutely refined an understanding of how your psychology works and what it needs to do to you to get you to buy something. And your decision to go out and buy something will be 99% subconscious. And it's really hard to break that habit. Anyone that's ever tried to go on a diet, get fitter, you know, it all plays into that sort of mentality. So it's really kind of hacking our own psychology to break that subconscious cycle. So some really super practical things that you can do right now. You can open up your inbox and just unsubscribe from all of the marketing emails you're getting in there. And actually there's software that will help you do that and make that a really quick process. You can take the apps off your phone. So a lot of the big retailers now have got their own apps and they give us more discount if we get the app. That's because they can collect more data on us.
Yes.
So they know how we're going to behave. They can sell more to us and they can use things like push notifications to command our attention.
Especially if location is turned on. So if they know that you're next to the smoothie shop, they'll push a notification for $1 off a smoothie just because they think that will make it one step easier for you to go buy the thing, right?
Exactly. So uninstalling, turning off your notifications, just taking back command of your time and your space and your energy and managing your doom scrolling. Because the more you're on social media, the more adverts you're consuming. And the stats around how many adverts, we consume around 10,000 advertising messages a day.
It's wild.
And it's probably even more than that, to be honest with you. But that's all subconsciously going in and feeding on our insecurities, basically, because the majority of advertising is selling you an aspiration of this car or this piece of jewelry or this dress is going to make you feel better, which makes you feel like you're not enough right now without that thing.
Yeah, exactly. And enough is the real word here to focus on, in my opinion, because I have stumbled upon this almost my entire adult and I dare say child life, is this concept of enough and needing to be more, me being more, consume more, do more, be more, all the things. And I think we're at a breaking point of enough is enough, right? And that breaking that cycle, because anytime you've ever bought something online, you get the quick dopamine rush when you hit buy now. But then it quickly subsides until you need to buy another thing. Because it reminds me of a conversation I had recently with economist Melina Palmer about this exact thing, is that the dopamine rush is when you hit the button, not when you actually get the thing.
So interestingly, psychologists have looked at this and it's when you add to cart that you get that rush. So it's before you've even checked out. And that's because we have loss aversion. So this psychological concept that we feel losses a greater pain than we feel the happiness of gaining something. So you will actually feel the pain of giving your money away.
Yes.
More acutely than you'll feel the joy of receiving something for that money. So that dopamine hit and all the happy hormones actually comes when we add to cart, but then is undermined when we spend the money.
Yeah.
And these are all things that retailers really manipulate. And it was so fascinating to write the book because I analysed all of the sneaky tactics. Like they will pump certain smells into areas of a grocery store. They will manipulate the lighting. They will change the layout to get you trapped in there.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of things like if you touch something, you're more likely to buy it because you've formed a physical connection with it. So obviously e-commerce retailers are really trying to work their way around things like that. Shopping carts in the grocery store, if they're bigger, you'll spend 40% more.
Yes.
So that they've doubled in size over the last 10 years. There's so much going on manipulating us to get us to spend more money, to buy more stuff that we don't need because we think it's going to make us happier and healthier and more socially acceptable. And actually, it doesn't. Because like you said, you're just there, then you've got to go out next week and buy more stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned this in the book and think about your local grocery store, the one that you go to regularly. The eggs and the milk and the bread are in the back of the store, and they force you to weave through all of this maze of, really exciting, enticing things, mostly processed foods in the freezer section, to get to it. And, you even provided a very simple solution of think about the journey you take in your grocery store. Instead of starting first with fruits and vegetables, right, where the floral department is as well, right, to end your shopping journey there. And how does that change what you actually put into your cart? It's worth trying this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And the front of the store is the display that will always change, and there'll be interesting things, and there'll be low priced items, because as soon as you have committed to buying something, you are then in a spendy kind of mood and you will go and spend more. So kind of put your blinkers on when you go in. Don't get enticed by those ever-changing, exciting, seasonal aisles, and then do your journey in reverse. And the thing that you're doing there is you're waking yourself up. You're not doing it on autopilot. And I mean, I make my list for the grocery store by aisle so that I know I'm getting everything that I need. Taking a list with you and trying to avoid impulse purchases is another kind of hack that you can do. But if you then do that in reverse, you're more conscious, and the store has not been designed like that. It's been designed that you will go a certain way and they will manipulate you that way. So you can actually start to bring a bit more consciousness to your shopping habits. The other thing when you're buying online, where a lot of this is so carefully designed in terms of user experience on websites and things, is to just pause. If you think that you need something, just take a breath. Don't add it to your cart, because if they've ever had your email address, they will be able to track you and send you discounts to get you to buy it. But just go away, close it down, get rid of that tab, get rid of it on your phone. And in 24 hours, see if you still remember what you were going to buy, because 9 times out of 10, you won't. And actually, there's some really simple questions I share in the book that I just always encourage people to consciously bring to mind when they're having that urge to spend something, which are, do I really need this? What advertising message has made me think that I need this? Because we never buy something that we want. We only buy because we need something. And so you will have been manipulated into believing that you need that thing. What emotional need are you trying to fill through that purchase? So what has triggered that spend? Did you have a bad day? Have you got a date coming up that you don't feel very confident about? So you're looking for that perfect outfit or makeup or whatever. What emotional need are you trying to fill? And then how can you fulfill that emotional need elsewhere? So if you need a confidence boost, what will actually make you feel more confident that isn't just buying stuff? If you need to feel better after a bad day, how can you do some actual self-care? What can you do to solve that problem in another way? Because you will either find that that problem has been completely manufactured by an advertiser and doesn't actually exist, or it is a problem. It's something within you that cannot be solved by just buying more stuff.
Yes, preach. I mean, think about all the things that you've purchased in the last week or even the last 30 days. There's also like the ripple effect of it. It's like you talk about the fact that cellulite is 100% made up thing. It's like not a thing, but people sell us creams to fix the cellulite on our beautiful curves. And then you go one step further and go, well, I need some new workout tights. And then, oh, you know what? I really want to upgrade my yoga membership. And oh yeah, I'm going to need a new yoga mat to go to yoga. And oh, my water bottle is not so great. Blah, 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 blah. Where does it end? Enough. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So I want to talk solutions, because I feel like we're on a roll here. And hopefully you guys are getting fired up as well, listening to us have this conversation, because I think there are some really brilliant solutions already out there in your local community. So let's talk about some of those ways to, instead of buying a thing, we could potentially borrow and share a thing in our local community. So give us some ideas here.
So I find it absolutely ridiculous that we all have a toolbox in our loft or in our garage or tucked under the bed, when you probably use that, 3 times a year to do a bit of DIY. like, where have the days gone when you would just go and knock on a neighbour's door and borrow something from them?
Yes.
So luckily that mentality is coming back. And I think actually, again, to kind of touch back to the pandemic, we were all spending so much time in our space that we were realizing how cluttered it was and wanting to change our space up and get rid of some stuff. And hopefully that's going to be the catalyst with some of these innovations that are coming in and some of these things that already exist. And that kind of connection that we all got, just getting to know your neighbours a little bit better. Hopefully we're going to get back to that mentality of just knocking next door and borrowing the thing that you need. I always think when I lived in an apartment that was teeny tiny, it was my first ever place I lived by myself, and I had no room for a mop or a vacuum or anything, but we had one collectively in a cupboard on the corridor, and you just nip down and use it, and then you'd put it back. And everyone would look after it. And the solutions, we're often told the solutions to these problems are technological and are far off in the future. And we all need to go to Mars and we're going to have a better life. But sometimes it's just as simple as knocking on your neighbor's door and saying, hey, I need a power drill. Instead of buying one next day delivery on Amazon, have you got one I can borrow?
Yes.
And actually there's Facebook groups, there's buy nothing new groups where you can swap furniture and things. So if you're moving house, there's Library of Things, which is exactly how it sounds. Libraries in your community that don't just give out books, they give out things that you might need. So if you suddenly decide that you want to get into making waffles, you can go borrow a waffle iron, because probably that urge is going to die down when you realize how annoying waffle irons are to clean. Yes. And that waffle iron's just going to go into the back of a cupboard and never be seen again.
Yes.
You can just go return it. And then the next person who has the urge to make waffles can go borrow it. And we're not having to make 50 different waffle irons that are only going to get used once.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I am so all over this. So side note to anyone that's listening to us right now, everything that Sian talks about and ideas that we share can be found in the show notes. So the simplifierspodcast.com. So have no worries if you're in your car right now going, hang on, what did she just say? It's all there in the show notes to find it. But okay, so here's the thing, Sian, you know this about me. I have moved across the planet twice now in my life, and I've learned so much in that process, because when you have to move from one continent to another, it is impossible to bring all of your stuff from point A to point B. So with both moves, both times, I got rid of 90% of my possessions. Only 10% came with us. I'm literally talking like, the kids and I each had 2 suitcases and a backpack each, and then a few keepsakes went on a boat to go across the planet. So here's the things that I learned in that process, and certainly simplifying down and decluttering, is that my 90% of stuff did not go into a landfill. It went through Buy Nothing, which is a fantastic nonprofit that's all around the world. There are chapters in your local city, I'm willing to bet, where you can post things like a couch, a fridge, a set of pans, a turkey baster. It doesn't matter, like all the things that are out there to give freely to people in your local community. And Buy Nothing has been such a huge resource for me, not only in letting things go, but also receiving when we moved, because we moved into a house that was empty. And so everything had to be replenished, a couch, a set of cake pans, this, that, and all of that. So it's a huge resource. Another app that came in handy is called Olio, O-L-I-O. Same concept, just in an app, but then also perishable and non-perishable foods could be shifted from one place to another. Because sometimes it's hard to be like, I got a bag of half-open rice. I don't want to throw it away. Like it was a way to move things back and forth. But you also talk about in the book, like repair cafes, community fridges, things like that. What's a repair cafe real quick?
So much of our technology and our stuff now is designed not to be repaired. Yes. We upgrade our phones every year. Why? Do we really need to? But actually legislation is starting to come in, particularly in the EU, that actually companies are not going to be allowed to design their products to be unrepairable anymore. But what has happened, because we've got into that cycle of just buying something new every time something breaks, is we've kind of lost the art of repairing stuff and knowing how to do that. But what's happening in communities is repair cafes are springing up. So these are spaces in your town hall or in your library or even in a cafe where people will get together, however regularly they want to do it, and will offer their repair skills. So you can take along something that needs to be repaired and you can either learn how to repair it or someone will repair it for you.
Yes.
And we can learn skills like altering your clothes. Your clothes will fit you much better and will look stunning on you if you alter them to fit your figure exactly, because that's not how they're made in this mass production. And actually, it's really simple to do. And, just simple things like sewing back on a button, darning a hole, things like that. They extend the life cycle of the things that you use and actually make you fall back in love with them. If that dress, it looks perfect on you because you've been stitched into it, you're going to wear that at every possible occasion. You're not going to feel bad and need to go buy another one. And it's such a nice way of meeting the people in your community in a way that isn't centered around just buying more stuff and being on that hamster wheel still.
Yes. And I have to give a local shout out. So I live up in Frisco, Texas, just north of Dallas. We have the very best library, genuinely. The library, of course, it's free to get a library card, but they've just recently offered things that you can check out are cake pans, ukuleles, and you can get DVDs to teach you how to play the ukulele. That was my fun little Christmas adventure. There's like 3D printing machines. There's even a small run printing press where you can publish your own book. All of it is available for the community. And so it just makes you think about, like, where am I living? What are the local resources that are available? And just hearing about Frisco Library, that means that somewhere, someone along the way on a city council level said, you know what? We're going to invest in this for our local community. We had to make a decision. We had to vote on it. We had to allocate budget dollars. And that didn't just come out of nowhere. I'm sure there was people that said, this is important, this is a priority, and this is what we want to put into our 5-year plan. And ask that from your local library as well. Like, it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I want to come live where you are.
Yes.
We have a really good community fridge as well. So shout out real quick to community fridges, which are essentially taking food waste from, restaurants and supermarkets, grocery stores, even just within the local community, and allowing people to go and just fill a bag of the things that you need. Because actually the majority of stuff that goes to waste from retailers and restaurants and hospitality is actually perfectly fine for consumption. It's just that, it's within their regulations that they can't sell it, but you can still eat it. And so there's also a really good app. If you don't have a local community fridge, there's a really good app called Too Good To Go, and they are in the UK and the US. And you can buy a grab bag surprise meal from one of your local restaurants that otherwise would have gone to waste. And that's a really good way to get a delicious, climate-friendly lunch.
Such a great tip. Too Good To Go, a great little app. They also work with bakeries as well. So things that are, hit their quote unquote expiration date, but are still just great breads, great pastries. Absolutely. So I hope that this conversation is firing you up, whoever's listening around the world, and not getting that place of like, it's too big, I can't solve it. Never mind, I'm pressing the big red F it button and getting fast food and fast fashion today. But there is solutions out there in the world already. And then when you start to see that others in your neighborhood, your community are also finding these solutions, that's, again, the critical mass. That's where you get empowered, and then you begin to vote in your local elections, send petitions, be part of petitions, speaking up at council meetings, and also speaking up in social media and asking these brands, big and small, to be held accountable for their action. That's where the change happens. Oh, Sian, I hope that people are really excited about this. And again, in a concept of reemergence and changing for the better, I highly encourage you guys, read this book. It's called Buy Better, Consume Less, Create Real Environmental Change. You can find that at your local bookstore anywhere around the world or online. And side note, if you are in the States, this book is being released on June 21st, 2022. So you can pre-order that now. And if you're afraid that it's going to be like, ooh, Snorefest, this is going to be really long and kind of dry, it is definitely not. There are simple, practical tips that will help you make positive change in your community. So, Sian, I have a few questions as we wrap up here, and thank you again so much for your time. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours on this, and I'd be like, yeah, drop the mic, go. So here's a few questions we ask everybody on the podcast. One, tell us one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system.
So a book that I come back to on the regular is called The Big Leap. And it is just fantastic from a psychological point of view because it challenges your belief about why you are not as successful as you maybe want to be. And the whole premise of it is that our assumption is you're not successful or not as successful because you're scared of failure. But actually the premise is that you are scared of who you will be when you succeed and making that next big leap. And in the context of what we've talked about and the way we're sold stuff to try and be somebody better, it's just a really interesting deep dive into the psychology behind why we want the things we want, why we sabotage ourselves, and the barriers mentally that we build for ourselves. And I think the more we can understand our own psychology, the better we can implement a lot of the stuff we've been talking about.
Yes. Oh, great book. We will link that up in the show notes if you guys are curious about it, again, over at the simplifierspodcast.com. So tell me, who's one person, somebody you know personally in your network that you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
That's a very hard choice because I know a lot of brilliant change makers, but I would really love to give a shout out to a fantastic colleague of mine called Jo Salter. She's here in the UK. She's in the ethical fashion space, and she is just one of those people that sees problems and goes, I'm going to solve that. I'm going to do something about it. And the work that she's doing around improving people's lives in fashion supply chains, improving the environmental credentials of the clothes that we wear, and really embedding all of the transparency and the responsibility that we've talked about today is just fantastic. And she was my co-host when we ran the Be the Change Awards in 2019. I just love working with her. She brings fantastic energy and she's just up to some brilliant, brilliant stuff.
Oh, she's a great recommendation. We'll link her up in the show notes for people if you guys want to check her out as well. And also one thought, just to throw this out there, if you're like, well, hang on, Mary, you're telling me to buy better and consume less, but then you're also telling me to go buy a book. Hey, why don't you tell or ask your local library to source a copy of this book as well? Ask them to put a few of these on their shelves so that you and everybody in your community can also read this book also. So in the show notes, you can find all of Sian's social media channels in order to connect with her directly, both on Twitter as well as Instagram. And her website is ethicalhour.co.uk. So make sure to go to the show notes. You can click there to connect. So Sian, my final question for you today is this. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and she's going, yeah, I get it. It makes sense. I'm looking at my closet full of stuff and half of it doesn't fit. And my food and my fridge is half of it's gone off. And there's a lot of waste that's happening. She's feeling encouraged, but also discouraged at the same time. So what's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to help her and encourage her?
I just want to bring it back to that word that you used that is the most powerful word I think that we have for this, and that is enough. You are enough with what you have. You are doing enough, and you don't need to feel that anxiety and shame and heap of responsibility for all of this, because we can all solve it together. And actually bringing it back to enough gets us off of that hamster wheel and out of that consumption cycle that is just driving us all mad. So just start there. And then it is that thing of do what you can with what you have, and we will get there.
Preach. Big love to you, Sian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.